best way for me to go about it is to speak about my experiences with Shakespeare, what it is that I've learned, and also what I continue to learn through teaching. I think also in this particular context, I sort of see my role as the person who's sort of bridging between, you know, the student and the teacher maybe. I was definitely a high school student a while ago, but I do interact a lot with university students, and I am fairly small, so I'm still humbled by the process. Anyhow, so I think it's important just to recognize from the jump that I wasn't always the person who was sure that I actually liked Shakespeare. I wasn't sure how to get my head around it. To me, it always felt like something that belonged, quite frankly, to white people. I was always like, that is something that white people understand, that they obviously love, that is a legacy amongst themselves in some sort of way. That's how I saw it. Until I think it was when I was in grade 8 that we started working with Romeo and Juliet. And even then it wasn't something that I thought I loved in particular until we got up and we actually started to read the play. But by reading the play, I don't mean just sitting at desks and trying to figure it out in that way. It was only once I actually picked up the text, and for me, because I always wanted to be a performer, seeing the words actually came alive brought the story to life for me, which meant that that's how I started to go, okay, maybe there's something there, you know, maybe I can understand it a little bit. But now that's something that I really look back on and that I treasure and that I look at very carefully with my own students, because I understand that my first interaction, well, their first interactions with Shakespeare might be me, and I'm the person that plants that first tiny seed. I had absolutely no idea when I was 13 that I would then continue to really take on this thing, and it seems like I will probably be doing it for the rest of my life because Shakespeare doesn't end. But I had no idea that I would be interested in growing that thing. So I think that it's also important to note that sometimes you plant the seed and they don't get excited initially, but I come back the following year, and I find that, so I was saying for me specifically, I work with the UCT students. I'm working with second year students now, but I still have my third year students who are still very interested in what it is that I'm doing with my second year students now, and still want to continue to work with me, because they understand that it's also not an isolated thing. Anyway, cut back to 13 years old, so we do Romeo and Juliet. Then I think we did Hamlet the following year, and then I think that by the time I was in matric, I wrote my exam on Macbeth. Now, I must be honest, I definitely understood aspects of the story, but I was also fortunate enough to be at a school where I had the sort of teachers who had the time, okay, to get up and sort of teach me the thing by standing, but would also sit and teach me basically what I should write in the exam to make sure that I would pass. Does that make sense? And those are two completely different things, actually. It's not the same. And I find the more and more that I teach, I start to see why it's so important that our approaches in that way do need to change, because the understanding really, really matters. I mean, I was definitely very good at writing a whole essay on the witches in Macbeth and how it might work, but that's also because I'm pretty sure that I picked up 4 previous exam papers, understood kind of what the general themes are, and so all I did was make sure you tick the right boxes, you know. But the point is, I was one child. Woo, okay. But the point is, I understand through that, you know, is that I was one kid who was in a position to make sure that I would be able to actually pass English in that way. Not all kids are given the same opportunity now. Anyhow, so I get through my matric exams, blah, 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 and then I get to varsity, and I've decided, obviously, what I want to do is drama. I also decided to study history and English, because I like stories a lot. Anyway, and I think even then, my interactions with Shakespeare were very, very limited. I mean, even at drama school, I know that Shakespeare wasn't the first thing that I would nominate for my third year exam. You know what I mean? Once it was time to pick what I might want to direct or what I might want to be in, I definitely didn't go, okay, cool, let's start off with some Twelfth Night, you know? It still didn't feel like something that had anything directly to do with me. So, I think it was the first time that I tried, yes, was 6 years ago. And I like to tell this story because I like to remind myself that sometimes you have to come back to something before it can actually be yours. So about 6 years ago, I tried for the first time for the Brett Goldin Bursary. At the time, I was working on Missing with John Gunny and Susan Danford and Apollo Mjogo. And I remember Susan Danford and John Gully were both very happy to kind of talk me through what I could pick for the audition process. What they need for the Brett Goldin Bursary is for you to perform 2 classical texts. So obviously we're going to have to pick something Shakespeare. It is for the RSC, you know. You can't run away from it. And I think it's just all again, let's just ignore it and then I'll just pretend. Anyway, and I remember it was when I started to interact with Shakespeare in that way that I started to get further clues into what it was actually about. And that was because I had the sort of teacher in Susan Danford who would sit down and go through the text with me, but help me understand it in my way. And it was the first time that it actually started to sit in me. And that's when, I would look at, I remember I was looking very specifically at Juliet's monologues, and that's when I started to look and be like, wait, this shouldn't be called Romeo and Juliet, it should be called Juliet and Romeo. She drives everything, you know. The interpretation of Juliet that I had in my mind that I had carried, because I thought that it was something far away from me, was of this simpering, sad, melancholic, I don't know what I assumed. I just thought, I felt like she was very far from me. So the discovery that I could play an uncompromising, very present, Juliet who has an opinion, who does all of this, who makes the choice to love someone that she shouldn't love. That's an active decision. And so we need to start to understand that Shakespeare's characters could look a little bit like me and could also, all their decisions could be played with agency. It completely changed my interpretation of the work. Anyhow, so that year I lost the Brett Goldin Bursary. I was so devastated. I was so sure I would never try again. When you walk out and you're like, I am done with this. It cannot be. And but because I have older mentors that are so incredible, John Gully and Susan Danford were definitely like, just because they said that you're young the last time, it doesn't mean that you're not going to try this time. So 2 years later, they forced me to go back, and I think that that was so valuable for me, because what I did was, instead of going, okay, cool, let me pick a new monologue, I had just started. In my previous audition, I feel, I just started to really understand what it was that I was tackling in Juliet. So I decided for that audition to actually go back to that monologue. And it was crazy because with that monologue, then I was awarded the Brett Goldin Bursary. And that's just because I think that Shakespeare has this sort of structure for a performer, and I suppose also for writers and for readers. You can trust the structure to hold enough for you to be able to play with it. And that's really amazing, which then leads me to my next point about if we once you understand the structure, you can really start to play with it, and once you start to play with it, you can rip it up, which is not to say that you bastardize it or you take it away from what it is, but it means that you can really start to adopt it within your own context. I also always try and remember that the time in which Shakespeare was done, it wasn't just done for an elite group of people who come to the theatre on Saturdays and Fridays and can afford to buy 200 rand tickets. No, it was for the people. It was for the people. Therefore, the context in which Shakespeare is performed, for me, is incredibly important. And there is no point in ignoring the context in which it plays. It's to no advantage whatsoever. All it does is it creates a greater distance. Is everybody with me? Yes. Cool. So, basically, after I won the second Brett Goldin Bursary, I went to, no, not the second, after I won it, it was the final one that they were not handing out, that one had to earn. But once I got there, what was really, really incredible was things were evened out immediately. So what I mean by that is it's given to 2 South African actors. So it was me and a really, really incredible actor called David Viviers. And once we got there, we had to have dinner with, I remember with Sir Anthony Scher and Greg Doran, who's the artistic director. So we're sitting there and we're both trying to not hyperventilate, So we're like, I just got off a flight and I'm definitely at the Royal Shakespeare Company! Be cool. And I remember they turned to us and they were like, oh, okay, cool, so you guys are going to do your monologues tomorrow then for the company. And we were like, what do you even mean? They were like, no, the monologues that you auditioned with are the ones you will be performing tomorrow for the company. And we were so, so anxious, and I got home and I wanted to hurl, and I was just like, I just don't understand what has happened, this is insane. But that's the nice thing about not having an option, So the next day, the entire company of Cinderline and of Hamlet all came in, and they all sat there, and we were on the Swan Theatre stage, and it was time to perform. And what was really, really insane was that it, like I said, it evened it right out, because as soon as I started talking, I was like, hang on, man, I am Juliet. Regardless of whether I'm in Stratford, whether I'm at home at the Baxter playing Juliet, whether I'm at home in the Northwest in Taung or Kimberley or Khanisa or Tlapeng, whatever, it doesn't matter. I am her. And it was really, really amazing, because the reception that we got to our performances was wild. A lot of the company were like, why are they giving you jobs? And I was like, exactly, I'm here to take yours. But it just really helped for me to understand that what Chris was saying about this impression that you go all the way, you know, to Stratford in order to get the best versions of these stories. It's a lie, you know, it's not true. Anyhow, so while I was there, we did a lot of workshops and we learned a lot, and I had said that if I was awarded a bursary, I would make sure that whatever I learned there, I would figure out what was of value and what I could bring home and teach here, which has been really, really important. And it was while I was there also that I discovered a lot of things. Firstly, that we are definitely good enough and that we can actually do this thing, that the story sits well in me, on everyone, because it's just a human story, and at the end of the day, Shakespeare is really just Shakespeare. We can all be Shakespeare also. This is what I like to say to my kids a lot. Show with a lot of commitment, we know, a lot of commitment, that we all have the abilities to tell stories. Anyhow, and it was in my time there also that I was really, really fortunate enough to have been taught by Cicely Berry. And while I was there, one of the things that she really rooted in me was that there is no point in dancing around these stories and trying to figure them out. At the end of the day, just get to the play and read it out loud. Start there. We can make it so complicated with an analysis of this and this and that and that, when actually at the end of the day, once you've got, well, I don't have to play with me now, but once you have the text with you, that is the first start. And you make meaning as soon as you speak it out loud. And to be very honest with you, to be faced with Cicely Berry going, okay, cool, so you're definitely going to read Sonnet 147 or whatever, and she's looking you at you dead in the eye, and she's like, no, but try, give it a go. I remember I must have asked her about 6 questions to try and stall, so that I wouldn't have to be reading for Cicely Berry, but at some stage she was like, oh no, I'm just going to read, and I did. And it was through being able to read with her 5 times that I got brave enough to get a little bit louder each time, to try something new each time, that I started to hear what she meant when she'd be like, okay, now put some body into it, you know. What do you mean? What story are you telling? Basically, she gave me a better lens and windows into how to shake up the story and how to treat the language, and also how I can definitely adopt it and make it my own without me having to be anything other than what I am, which is a black South African girl all the way from South Africa in the middle of Stratford. Anyhow, so learned all of the things there, blah, 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 blah. And then I came back home, and then I got the opportunity to guest lecture at UCT, second year students. So I started doing that last year, and it was really, really incredible, and I think that's the work that I mostly want to talk about now. Firstly, this idea of translating is such an interesting one. Thank you so much, Robin. You made so much sense to me in so many insane ways. I was like, I trans language. This is what we do. The idea of translating, it keeps changing and changing shapes and colors in my mind, only because it's one thing when you're having to perform something for yourself, but as soon as you have students, and I don't have to tell any of you this because you obviously know, you care so, it feels to me almost like I care so much more about wanting them to understand it, and really wanting them to care, and really wanting them to get it, because it makes such a difference when they do, you know. Not for me, but because when I look into your eyes and you finally understand what would a rose smell is sweet, and those eyes, everything clicks into place. And so how I started looking at translating is, so the only way to begin to translate something is first by handing the students the tools that they need to begin to deal with this particular brand of drama, which I call Shakespeare. So I'm just going to take you through my processes and kind of see how it goes, and then afterwards we can chat about it a little bit and discuss what we do and what we don't do. Anyhow, the very first thing that I like to do is I walk into the classroom, and they're not always very excited to be there. They're already terrified of the scenes that they're going to have to perform at the end of the term, and they're like, I don't understand anything, and they have very little hope that they are going to understand anything. So I think that there is absolutely nothing wrong with simplifying things, you know, and often I found that that was the problem with how I saw Shakespeare initially. I held it in great reverence, so I was scared to simplify things because I assumed that everything was super complicated. I'm so sorry, I actually should digress here just for a second to say that around about the time that I won the second Brett Goldin Bursary was when I discovered that copy of Julius Caesar, published in 1937 by Vids Press in my grandmother's garage in her archives. And that really blew my mind, you know, and I just feel like I should say that just because that really changed my position of how I saw my role at the RSC. Just because before then, because I saw it as something that was so much not of me, you know, I would have arrived there in a different sort of way. But because I discovered this particular copy and I was like, help. If Saul Blakey himself had the time to sit down before Bantu education even and translate this thing, there must be something in it, you know. There must be something. If he cared enough to do all of that, you know what I mean, there must be something. And also to see that it had gone through the hands of so many of my family members that were so much older than me, then helped me understand that I do in fact have a legacy here. Which was so surprising because, like I said, in my mind, no way, how, you know. So it means that by the time I got to the RSC, you know, I didn't just arrive there going, wow, what are your stories? I had stories to tell too, of my own, the way that I understood them. Anyhow, so, like I said, I really see no problem in simplifying things. So the first thing that I like to do with my students is I make them draw it. So that's what you see over here. This is what my second year students have done. They got very detailed about it. And I found that what that does is it just brings them into the room and also they start to take responsibility immediately for the story. The point is, this is not my exam. I'm not the one that's going to have to tell the story. And also because they understand, that's the first thing that I say to them. The scene that you're performing, it might be for your exam, but I'm teaching you not just for your exam. I'm teaching you so that you're going to be able to deal with this forever and ever. And so you need to carry that onto stage. I'm not just there for you to perform this one scene. Who is going to believe the balcony scene if we are not buying that Romeo and Juliet must have met now at the ball and were palm to palm, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense. So what I find is they all like to sit together, they argue, and also then they really get clear about what actually happens in the story. And then we start to go, there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. How do we get to all of that? And I also do that because later on, but I'll talk about this a little bit more, I go back to the prologue. So what I like to do is, I always say to them, we know what's going to happen at the end of the story. They literally tell you at the beginning what is going to happen at the end of the story. Let's not pretend you don't know, which means that you as the student then have to take responsibility. Your job is to figure out what has happened that has led to that moment and what are you playing of that. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So directly after we've done that and we've really broken down the story, it becomes really interesting because that's when I start to hear their versions of what it is. And that's when we really start to talk as an entire class about how we see it. And to me, it's really important, and that was something that you were talking about too, about how it is that you actually deal with your learners, you know. So for me, I'm fortunate enough to only have 7 students at a time, you know, which makes a huge difference. Please, I understand. Huge difference, not the same. Which means that then we have the time for them to always give me their feedback, which I really, really try to make time for. And what I do is I understand that I also only have a certain amount of classes with them, so I'm always clear with them about how we are going to have lots of homework. So part of that homework, for example, is after we are done building the world and we've discussed it, I make them play it out, so they have to play Romeo and Juliet, do a little performance of it in 3 minutes. Because then that forces the action, and then you better know what it is that you're doing and which part you're doing. And also because what I try and do is no one has any particular role. What we are first centered on is just telling the story and figuring out what the story is. A really nice, a really nice game that I also like to play, but that I'm going to play with all of you. So what I'll do is I'll discuss all of this, and then once we get into the workshop, I'll show you practically kind of how I do all of these things. But I find starting off with a game really makes a huge difference. And it is, I suppose it is because I'm a performer, but really, it's called a play, so play, you know. And that helps. And also, they all have to understand, like I said, they are telling the story all together, so a game does that immediately. A very simple one that I like to play is I just bring a ball, one of those bouncy checkers balls, and I just say, let's get to 100. We're going to pass it to each other, and everyone must count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We never get to 100 on the first day. We never get to 100 on the second day, which is great when you have an entire term, because then by the time you do get to 100, everyone has also gotten through their scenes, and then everyone feels proud of what it is that they can do. Does that make sense? So that instead of seeing it as just your exam or just your learning, it's a shared thing. And they all get very excited for each other as they begin to understand things. Because from the first day, they're all vulnerable, you know, and I make that clear. Even if you are lucky enough to have grown up with Shakespeare in your household, and you can tell me about all of the movies, blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you something. When I hand you the text and I say, let's read, you also feel about this big and very scared of sitting in your own voice. So I make them do that because they have to trust each other. Then directly after that, I say to them, okay, cool, you guys need to go home, and I need you to come back with references. So this is where tasks are so good. And I know that you spoke a lot about creating your own world, and that's exactly what it is. So I always say to them, let's create some dreamscapes of what we think about Romeo and Juliet. And they go out and they go and look for all of their sources. And what's really great is they come in with an explanation of why it is that they picked that, which is great because for me, what's been really incredible about learning more about Shakespeare is not just what it is that I can do with Shakespeare, but the things that I learn where I can get to create my own stories. That's been the most exciting part. So that's for me where I start getting them to contextualize it for themselves and for them to start to express how they see it. You get all sorts of examples. It's the absolute best. I mean, you have Ariana Grande, you have Drake and Rihanna, you have Titanic. And it's not just about the characters, it's also about the world in which these two households exist. So for example, we have newspaper articles on the problem is not xenophobia, but a different type of phobia. They start to identify what the potential fights could be, you know. And it makes such a huge difference because they get so excited, and it means that the natural progression after that, you know, is that they kind of start to get a little bit more ready to pick up the text and to go, okay, cool, so I understand what the connection is with my own life and what this story is, but now how do I play that? And how do we do it with this? Then, the next part of that process is obviously iambic. I think that this is a really important aspect to teach just because I know that it's like the whole world just opens up to you when you get how you are supposed to read this thing. And that distance that I keep talking about where you feel like it's something so far from you, as soon as you have just 3 of those tools, and you can practice and re-practice with them, it makes you feel so good, you know, and then you don't feel like you're on the outside of something anymore. And for me, that's the place where I like my students to be. I like them to not feel like they're outside of it, because once you're in it, then you can criticize it. Then you can say, I like this, I don't like this. I think that this was a weaker one than this one. To be honest, 12th Night was terrible, but Hamlet is definitely for me. I don't want to create a generation of young people who feel like they can just say, I don't like Shakespeare. That's not the truth. You don't understand Shakespeare. You're absolutely entitled to not like what you don't like. That's absolutely okay, but you have to do that from a position of knowing as opposed to not knowing. Anyway, so the best way that I've found that I deal with iambic is I tell them from the jump, you are doing this thing, you are not going to get to pass it by, you are going to have to practice at home because I don't have the time in the classroom to teach you. So I'm going to need you, as I said, to speak it out loud, because that makes all the difference for the texture. What I found was, I picked Sonnet 147 just because that's the one that I stopped when I told you about Cicely Berry being like, read! This was the one. And the reason that I like to start with the sonnet is because sonnets are the most extreme, you know, of the feeling. And if what we're trying to get them to understand is how extreme the world that we're writing about, that we're performing about, that we're engaging with is, you have to get yourself directly in it. So So a sonnet also is a very clear way to show them what a beginning, middle, and end actually looks like, you know, and to go, this is what the extreme feeling is, this is what the opposite feeling is, and also because with sonnets, they are addressed to someone. So that helps. The same way as in a play, they have to address each other in order to tell the story. It's important for them when they're speaking the sonnet out loud to also understand that it is for someone. Because that, and also considering, this is something that I write a little bit more about, considering that, you know, we come from such a great and rich oral storytelling tradition, it just doesn't make sense to me why we would leave out this aspect of things in teaching this. Anyhow, iambic is also really great to do on the sonnet just because it's very clear, and also because then they can go home with this. What I do is, as we go, we create resources, and resources that they can go through themselves, so that I'm not wasting all of the paper in the world trying to gather all of the things, and also because then they understand that it's their responsibility. However it is that they see the story, it's up to them to look after that thing. If they want to copy down sonnet 147 as we're all sitting there and we're doing it, that's good, and that's your resource, because at the end of the lesson I'm going to say to you, okay, now go home this weekend, and I'm going to need you to read that thing out loud at least 18 times. It doesn't help if you read it a little bit like this, because by the time I put you on stage and I need you to read it out loud, you're scared of your own voice, and that just doesn't help. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about the different kinds of students that I have, and the approaches that I have in teaching students who I understand from completely different backgrounds. I try really, really hard to, I don't like to adjust things or change things to fit certain people in certain ways, because it doesn't work that way, and also because thankfully with what it is that I'm working with, there actually is no need. So sometimes there are obvious challenges that arise, and I have to figure out how to negotiate that. And I found that it's always come down to my having been strong enough from the beginning to insist that everyone do the legwork. And by the legwork, I mean this work, the building of the foundations, because what it eventually does, actually, it brings us all to the same place. Sure, it's not easy, but it does bring us all to the same place, and I've seen it happen repeatedly. So for example, last year we were doing Macbeth, and I was working with a really incredible group of students, and two of my students were Xhosa speaking students. And they, you know, we did it, we went through the English, blah, 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 Macbeth was going well, and everyone in the class generally was kind of feeling good. But then I was fortunate enough to meet Buhle Ngaba, who's a really, really incredible translator and a student at UCT, and I worked with him on translating this particular Macbeth scene into isiXhosa. But the reason that I wanted to work, that brought up so many interesting questions, because I didn't want to just, any translation, just throw it there. That's not the point. I wanted to figure out, what is this particular context then? If they are wanting to talk to me, if they are saying to me, my students are going, okay, cool, we want to play a king and queen, Eastern Cape, this long ago, what does that mean then? You know, and it brought up so many questions, but so many interesting ones, because I realized that the adjustments that I had to make were so tiny, the way that you would any other story. So for example, they were very clear. They also understood the gods that we were talking about when we were referring to gods, you know. They also understood, and I understood, that what we needed to create within the translation in collaboration with Buhle was to translate the imagery, because that's a lot of what Shakespeare actually hangs on. So in terms of looking for access into the language and to make sure that we weren't creating a very, for lack of a better word, flaccid translation, that one just came. I really, really just wanted to make sure that what we were doing also was maintaining and revealing the integrity of the Xhosa language in itself. And it made such a huge difference, because let me tell you, when I had to give them that translation, because they were the ones that were like, yeah, Buhle, we'd be interested, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, hang on. Still do that work. I will see how we go this way. And when I finally gave them the Xhosa text, they were freaked out. They were so scared. It was even worse than the English one. And I laughed and I said, okay, you see now, you wanted it, and now it's here, and now you are going to have to deliver it, because it's been done, you know. I was really, really proud because that was the first time that UCT marked an isiXhosa Shakespeare dialogue exam. And it was also shocking because I was like, first time? What do you mean? Are we not in 2018? What is happening there? So that's also part of the reason why I knew that I had to go back this year just to continue the work. So now, in contrast to that, right, the reason that I want to speak about that in particular is because I have two students, also, again, they speak Xhosa, and obviously now because they had heard from the students last year that I translated, and they were very excited about this. So they came, they were like, hey, Buhle, oh my gosh, we're just wondering, can I please get a Xhosa version? And I was just like, no, babes. No, it doesn't work that way. I don't want to give the impression that we translate, that translation means we translate from English into African languages for Xhosa students, or you know what I mean? It doesn't work that way. What I mean, and that's what I mean by translation, is a far wider thing. It goes beyond language. The reason that I gave it to those students last year was because that was going to elevate their performance in that way. It doesn't mean that they hadn't done the work though, you know. And also the same way that I had little white boy, so sweet, good looking, lovely, ego, all of the things. By the time we got to the end of that process, he played the most vulnerable, incredible Macbeth, and to me, that's a translation in itself too, you know. And for that student to have gotten through his own things in that way, that too, 5 more minutes, got you. So I said no to them, you know, which was very, very interesting because they were taken aback, and I was also taken aback. I was like, wow, you are brave. But I was like, yes, that is really important to me because I do believe that everyone can do this thing. And so everyone should be challenged to do the thing. And what's even more rewarding is when I then eventually get to a lesson like yesterday, where they walk in and, you know, somebody walks on stage and I see Romeo, you know, and I see Juliet, and I'm like, you thought you couldn't do it in English, and here you are. And the reason that you could do it is because, sure, it might take you longer, but that's because I gave you tasks to go home and to go and practice. And it's up to you to decide how far in you want to do that, you know. And so now I'm at a place where, it's funny though, I'm at a place now where what I did was, Ksenia was really amazing to me because I like to say no to them, but I explore my options as the teacher on the side, just to see. And so I emailed Ksenia and I said to her, listen, I feel like you've done some Xhosa Romeo and Juliet there at Schools Festival. Can you send me a version? And she did, so she sent me this version, which I then took, and Fundile Majola and I are talking now about this version to figure it out and to see what we would like to adjust, what we wouldn't like to adjust, to make sure, because this is also a school level and the work that we're creating is also for a university level, but that's important because that's what we need. Imagine how amazing it would be if a kid went from Ksenia here to university, being able to continue in that way. That's my theory.
That doesn't make any sense.
It does. They're bits and bobs. This is why, you see, this is why we trust we do the work. But it's amazing because if the work wasn't there, this gives me an opportunity to continue the work. And so yesterday, after they did the English version and, you know, people were understanding at last, it settles, you know, and like I said, you can see the excitement when you're like, would a rose smell as? Oh, stop, what she means is, and I'm like, yes, babes, that's what she means. And so I said to them at the end of the lesson, okay, cool, let's just read through this. Don't get excited though, you know, don't get keen. And they read it, and they understood a little bit of it. And at the moment, what I'm looking at doing with a week and a half left till the exams is letting them do the first part. It's the balcony scene, I should have said that. I'm letting them do, Romeo will do his first monologue, we'll let Juliet go into her first monologue, we'll let them do dialogue, but the same way, you know, I speak about context, the same way that I can speak this way, and then all of a sudden, English and Setswana. That's the approach that I'd like them to have, and that's the only way I will actually let it happen. So that what we're looking at then is, it is a translation, sure, but a translation of how we speak for real, which is what Robin was talking about, which is really amazing. But it's funny, that kind of work is very intricate and it is very hard, and also you can't cheat it, which is why I make sure that we do all of this. What shall I end off with? that it certainly isn't easy work, as we all know, and also figuring out a way and finding the time to be patient enough with every kid is definitely also not easy. But I really think, let's play more, but also they can decide, you know. I feel like, I know that I've also only been a teacher for such a short while, not for a long while, and I'm already so invested in all of them for forever. I can't imagine what it must be like to have to deal with so many students that pass every single year. But I also just feel like, you know what, even at 16, 17, 14, what, you are old enough also to be able to take responsibility for your own thing. All that I can do is to give you the structure and you dance in it. But I really feel like play is an unexplored territory in South Africa that we could really just push further, because there is direction. I mean, through play I get to figure out rhythm, which then leads me to iambic pentameter, which leads me to sonnets, which leads me to big feelings, which leads me to Romeo and Juliet, which leads me to them being brave enough to actually give it a go and read it out loud, which then leads me to, okay, cool, but in what language